Craig.
I want to dig a little deeper into the issue of guns in America now with our own Saturday Brain Trust. We are not going to stop talking about this. This is Washington Democratic strategist Doug Thornell, Politico's Manu Raju, back with us, and Colin Hanna as well, president of Let Freedom Ring, joining me from Philadelphia. Thanks, gentlemen, for being back.
Great to be with you.
Doug, let me start with you. Is arming our teachers, is that one of the answers to gun violence in this country?
Well, I think we need to take a complete look at the situation. I think, Mr. LaPierre seems to think that guns had nothing to do with what happened in Newtown. The reality is it's interesting to listen to Republicans talking about putting armed police officers in schools when they've spent the last 2 or 3 years voting against funding local and state officials, including first responders and police officers. So it'd be interesting to hear from them where the money is going to come from. I'm supportive of having security officials in schools, but I think we also need to look at other issues, including the sale of guns.
Doug, unless you have a full-scale security team, I mean, some of our high schools, especially in this country, we're talking 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 kids. These campuses are sprawling. If you've got a 62-year-old retired cop sitting in the front office with a handgun, how much good does that really do?
It was a diversion by Mr. LaPierre in terms of trying to focus the conversation elsewhere and not on the issue of gun safety and the issue of high-capacity magazines and assault rifles that are being sold. He's trying to kind of, hold up a sign and say, look over here, and talk about putting, security guards and arming them in schools. Yeah. But that's not the real issue. The real issue is the availability of these guns to folks who really absolutely should not have them.
Here's another issue, Colin. Washington Post reporting here that gun sales in this country have absolutely soared since the December 14th shootings in Newtown, Connecticut. The Post says 8 days after Newtown, more than 5,100 requests in a single day for background checks by gun buyers. That was a record in Virginia. State Police in Maryland say they're going to receive more than 8,200 gun permit applications in December alone. Why does there seem to be such a rush to arm after a tragedy like this, Colin?
Well, the principal reason why people rush to buy guns is because they fear that if they don't buy them now, they won't be able to buy them later. Furthermore, if there are some kinds of guns that are proposed to be banned, those are exactly the kinds of guns that people would want to buy before they're banned. So there really shouldn't be any surprise about the nature or the timing. There's no question that this was an unspeakable tragedy. I'm not trying to suggest that. All I'm saying is that the habits that you're pointing out of gun buyers after an emergency are completely rational and have been proven time over time to be the case.
Manu, is that rational? Is it rational for folks to go out and apparently stock up for the revolution after a massive shooting?
That's not fair. That's not a fair question.
What part was not fair?
Stock up for the revolution. This is not about stocking up for the revolution.
There have been a number of people who have said since Newtown, along the lines of what you said, that one of the reasons that they are taking up arms is because they fear that the government is going to come after them and try to take their guns away.
And with reason. Look at what Senator Feinstein said. Look at what Governor Cuomo said. Look at all the talk.
Those are assault weapons bans. Those aren't. That's a far cry from taking guns away.
They're talking about confiscation as an option. Check your own news sources on both of those. Both of those politicians have specifically said within the last 3 days that confiscation is an option for the measures that they're proposing.
Hey, Craig.
Go ahead, Manu.
I would say.
Go ahead, Manu. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that the chances of getting something like that through Congress, even after this tragedy and an assault weapons ban, will still be very difficult in the new year, in the new Congress. People have that fear that an assault weapons ban or more gun control restrictions will come into play. But look, the political dynamics will still be very difficult to impose a lot of those restrictions, to reinstate an assault weapons ban. Getting that through will be hard. Yes, the debate has changed since Newtown, and Democrats are talking about this issue again when they've been afraid to do so for years. But actually enacting legislation is going to be a very, very tall order in the next Congress.
We've got to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some fiscal cliff stuff. But I also want to pick up where we just left off, because there is some polling that's out that speaks to what you just said about the sort of the political sentiment, the political will in this country to do something about guns. We're going to talk about that and, of course, the fiscal cliff right after this. Welcome back. This is the Brain Trust. Colin Hanna there, president of Let Freedom Ring. Politico's Manu Raju, Doug Thornell as well, Democratic strategist. I want to pick up where we left off. We were talking about guns. Doug, I know I cut you off. I'll start with you in just a second. Washington Post, again, this is another poll that was taken. This is a Gallup poll, and it shows that 58% of folks in this country, up from 44% last year, 58% support new gun measures. But when you ask them what kind of measures, the numbers begin to fall off considerably. It's akin to asking folks about tax loopholes, and they'll say, oh, you know, I think we should close loopholes. And you start talking about specific tax loopholes, and all of a sudden everyone, we don't want to lose mortgage interest deduction. Doug, what do we do? How do we bridge that chasm?
Well, you know, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You know, that's kind of what the situation with guns that we're looking at. I think, you know, just to back up a little bit in terms of the part you were talking about in terms of the government taking your guns. I mean, we need to remember that one of the biggest members of the NRA are gun manufacturers. Who benefits from all of the sales of guns? Gun manufacturers. The NRA is a huge they're the ones who are stoking a lot of the fear about the guns being taken away. They get $1 for every sale of a gun or a package of ammunition at many stores. So they benefit by having this weird relationship where they're stoking the fear and paranoia that the government's taking their guns away. Gun manufacturers benefit financially, and so does the NRA. So I don't think we should forget about that.
That is a point worth making. Colin, quick question, not to put you on the spot here. Are you an NRA member? Are you a member?
I am. I'm a life member.
Do you have high-capacity magazine clips?
I do not.
Do you see the need in restricting those?
It's right at the edge of what I think is constitutionally permissible. You know, it was permissible to restrict the sale of machine guns. That was done in 1934. This is relatively close to it. There are some real overreaches that I think a lot of people are talking about, but it's possible that high-capacity magazine restrictions could be done in a way that is constitutional. I'm just not sure that, frankly, that it's going to be that useful, that effective. I don't think that those are the solutions that will stop the epidemic of violence, but it's right at the edge of what might be constitutional.
Manu, you alluded to this before the break. Politically, there may not be the will. Fact of the matter is that there very well could not be the will 2 months from now in the halls of Congress. What are you hearing about this as the tragedy becomes more of a distant memory to a lot of folks?
Well, I mean, everyone, of course, is very upset about this and thinks that there needs to be a conversation. But what that conversation entails, there's where the disagreement lies. Look, I talked to a lot of senators about this, Democrats, too, who come from conservative states, some who are up for re-election, who are not convinced that there need to be further restrictions on guns. So not only do we have Republicans who, for the most part, would oppose further restrictions, not just in the Senate, but also in the Republican-controlled House, but a lot of conservative Democrats from states like Alaska or Louisiana, folks who have opposed reinstating the assault weapons ban. Now, when we talk about it in the new Congress, we'll see, because we'll wait for the president and his task force to unveil their proposal, and we'll see how sweeping and how tough they want to go on gun control, or whether or not they try to thread the needle, do a compromise measure that could attract some of those conservative Democrats, people like Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who've expressed some interest in doing something along the lines of restricting high-capacity magazines.
All right, last break here. When we come back, who will save the day as we get closer to the fiscal cliff? Back with the Brain Trust right after this. Back now, the Brain Trust for some final thoughts. Democratic strategist Doug Thornell, Politico's Manu Raju, Colin Hanna of the Let Freedom Ring operation there. Doug, let me start with you. Fiscal cliff, or as the LA Times put it yesterday, some Americans will wake up Tuesday with financial headaches to rival a New Year's Eve hangover, perhaps. Will we have a hangover or a deal on New Year's Day?
I don't think we're going to have a deal on New Year's Day. I think the politics right now, it seems that Republicans feel like it's better for them to cut taxes on January 1st or January 2nd than to do it now and protect middle-class Americans. So I think that we won't have a deal.
Colin, what type of agreements do you think have to be made behind closed doors for this thing to happen? And do you think this thing can still happen?
Well, I think there's a pretty good chance of a deal being worked out because you've got 4 deal makers, and what do deal makers do when they sit down at a table with the clock running out but make a deal? But I think that's the whole problem. I don't think we want a deal. I don't think the American public wants another deal. They want solutions.
Yeah.
A year ago, we had a chance with cut, cap, and balance with the fiscal cliff perhaps being passed, and we're now looking at the debt ceiling issue. We're going to be back into that fight. And let's focus on spending, not taxes. That's where the problem is.
Monty, there's some disagreement over what Colin just said. The president seems to be dealing from a position of strength, though. Is he likely to get concessions that he needs from Republicans to see his plan through, or is this simply about revenues?
This is mostly about revenues at this point. I think any deal that you will see the next day is going to be very narrow in scope. Will pretty much mostly deal with the issue of revenues and will show Republicans really backing down for their no tax position and allowing a rate increase of some kind. That said, I'm still very skeptical that they can get to a point that can get all sides agreeing to something and something that the Republicans can agree to in the House. There's a very I think a slim chance of that happening, but if anything happens, it's going to be a small scope deal, not the big deal that they've been talking about for a long time.
Colin, are you at all surprised that John Boehner has essentially been sidelined at this point to a certain extent?
I'm not surprised given the way the president has chosen to conduct this debate. And again, I say that the issue is frankly the wrong issue.
How has that been? How would you characterize the way he's conducted the debate?
He has been completely intransigent on several occasions. I understand that he has said, we're not talking about that. I won. These are the consequences of an election. So he has not been operating in a deal-making mode, even though he stands before the cameras occasionally and says it. I think he's got a chance to work a deal out through the Senate and then back it in through the House.
Doug, last word. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, where have Republicans been? They haven't bent at all. The president has bent. He reduced his revenue, the amount of revenue he's asking for. He wants to cut taxes for small businesses and individuals. He's bent on Medicare. So I think that's a little bit of an inaccurate way to describe what's going on. I think
we're going to have to leave it there.
We're going to have to leave it there.
Doug, Colin, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Manu. I really enjoyed having you guys with us. We usually like to have a few ladies here, but this was okay.
All right. Well, thanks a lot and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to all of you as well.